This is the very beginning of the 6th chapter in the Gospel of John. So John 6, as you probably know, this is like the essential Eucharistic Bible study. There are other places in the Gospels and the New Testament and the Old Testament also to look and study and pray with, to know more, to love more the Eucharist, but John 6 is the heart of it. So we start it today, and we're going to continue to read from John 6 for the next 5 weeks. Getting into the bread of life discourse. And this is perfect timing for two reasons. One of them's positive and one of them's negative. The positive one is that we just had the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, and some of you were able to be there, and I'm pretty jealous because I wish I could have been there, along with the 50 or 60,000 other Catholics that were there in Indianapolis. If you look online, if you look at videos or watch any of the talks, like everything I've heard has just been wonderful. And I hope that in this time of grace after this, that it continues to filter out to the rest of us who weren't there. So that's the positive reason. But the negative reason, of course, is that the Olympics, that are so exciting, got soured by this bizarre opening ceremony where the Last Supper was mocked, and our Lord and the Eucharist. So if you look around, there's plenty of statements from bishops from different parts of the world, actually, calling this out and saying this is not all right. And our own Bishop Cousins, who's from Minnesota, but he's in charge of the National Eucharistic Revival, in his statement, he said what was done was heinous. So this isn't we get desensitized to these things, but the Olympics are like a whole world event, and when in a whole world event something as sacred as the Last Supper of Jesus is mocked, then yeah, it's worth saying something about. So for both of these reasons, this is the perfect time to study and pray with John chapter 6. So in what we have today in the gospel, Jesus does two things. He prepares his listeners and he prefigures what will come. Okay, so he prepares his listeners for the next lesson. It's a little bit like it's a pedagogy. It's about teaching. So you learn about multiplication before you get into algebra. You learn multiplication for more complicated or sophisticated math. Jesus is preparing his listeners for something more after this. But he's also prefiguring what will come. What he says today says something about the sacrament of the Eucharist. What he does today is like a symbol for what is not a symbol. That is what we celebrate at Mass. It's a symbol today for the reality that is to come. It prefigures it. So, what's the situation in the gospel today? There are thousands of people, and they are hungry, and Jesus decides he will feed them. And he asks, where will we get the food to feed these people? And it says he asked Philip to test him because he knew what he was going to do. So when Philip says, there's no way, we don't have enough money, even 200 days of wages, they wouldn't even all be able to have a little. We can't do it. Jesus says, in some ways he says, you're right. And then he goes into work. The situation is with all these hungry people, they cannot be fed by natural means. So this is, just in this little setup, it already prefigures what we celebrate at Mass every day and every Sunday. Because we have a hunger and a need that no natural means, money or power or pleasure or honor, any combination, any amount of all of these things, no natural thing can remedy the hunger and need that we have. Now this hunger that is in us is often suppressed or ignored, but this is what the Eucharist is about. We start by recognizing our need and seeing Jesus' intention to fill. So it's, this is why there's a Eucharistic fast before receiving Jesus in Holy Communion. We fast for an hour. It used to be longer. The point is not to be hungry, but to remind ourselves, to remember and acknowledge the hunger that we do not feel, but is true. So it's interesting because the lesson from this, what this prefigures, the lesson is not come hungry to Mass. The lesson is more like whether we recognize it or not, we are starving and we can't help it. So come to Mass. So then, after the situation is set, what happens? Well, this boy gives the little bit of food that he has, this natural remedy for hunger. It goes to Jesus. And Jesus, after giving thanks, distributes it, and thousands are fed. They're not given just a taste. They are not given enough, but they're given an abundance, way more than they can eat. It says they had as much as they wanted, more than they needed, and there was a ton left over. Now, I don't think I have to say this, but just in case I will, just as a little note, please toss out any homilies, any preaching, any book that talks about this moment as the miracle of sharing, where Jesus starts to distribute the bread, and then people who actually had bread kind of hidden in their cloaks, they decide, well, I guess I can pull mine out and I'll share it with my neighbor. And there's like, that's not what happens here. And if this is what we're talking about, we completely miss what Jesus is doing and the whole point of this section, okay? So sometimes that pops up still. It's the most ridiculous thing. I don't know why anybody's interested in that idea, but I hope I didn't have to say that, and just in case I did. So what Jesus does here as he feeds them, he is working to prepare, again, those who are there with him in the gospel, and us who hear this later, prepares them for what is coming next. Like he shows them, he allows them to step into this. Jesus sees my need, and he cares about me, and he provides for me. I'm not going to starve by following him. Because he has fed me, I can trust him a little more. I have seen more of his power, and I'm more willing to follow him to the next step. He's got my attention, and my interest is growing. So he's just kind of like giving this little prologue to draw them along to the next thing, to prepare them. But this also, of course, prefigures what we celebrate at Mass, that the Eucharist is super abundant nourishment, that the little host that you and I receive contains far, far more than I am able to receive. So, like a very plain example, it's like going to dinner at your grandmother's house. At the end of dinner, you say, we did our best, but we did not even come close, and there is so much food left over. This was way too much food to begin with. Like as Jesus feeds them, again, it's prefiguring what is to come, and finally in the Eucharist, that there is an abundant nourishment that is more than we need, more than enough, way over the top, and a plenty left over. So then what happens afterward? After they have all been fed, it says they were prepared to make him king. They said, this is the prophet. And because Jesus recognizes that they're about to take him and make him king, carry him off and make him king, he withdraws to the mountain again alone. So what is he preparing them for? Well, he has set the stage for something, and the people are ready to crown him king, which would be like anyone else's end game. If you have the people who are ready to crown you king to lead them, then you'd think like, okay, great, we did what we needed to do today. But when they're ready to crown him king, he withdraws and he doesn't allow it to happen. He doesn't accept it. Apparently, this is not the point. This is not what he's aiming for here. He's aiming at something else. So he leaves them, as he withdraws, he leaves them wondering, like, what could he be trying to do? What is this man aiming for here? And so he leaves them thinking about what happened and what will happen next. Now, this is my favorite part. Okay, the prefiguring that happens in this and Jesus' withdrawal from being named king right then. This is elusive Jesus. Anyone who has received Holy Communion, even a single time, has some experience of Jesus being elusive, of drawing us on little by little, and like always remaining mysterious. So, like Jesus right now, he's here in the tabernacle, but he seems absent. When we receive him in the Eucharist, we really receive Jesus, but my heart doesn't react. There are times when you receive Holy Communion and there is intense joy and consolation, and then in the blink of an eye, I am hungry again and seeking again. As Jesus withdraws in these moments from our grasp, this isn't him being cruel, of course, but this is him working to gently attract us, to invite us, like, come a little closer. So another example is when a baby is learning how to walk. This is like, I can't imagine, I've been through it, I guess, but I don't remember it. I can't imagine what it's like for a baby when the parent takes they're just 6 inches back. There's this little gap between And they're like, come to me, come walk, take a step. And the baby musters all that it has and takes like one wobbly step and then falls into his parents' hands. And everybody's excited and cheering, like, wow, that was great work. And then the parent takes a step back, and it's a little bit further than last time. And the baby's got to be like, are you kidding me? Did you see what I just did? But the parent is doing this not to be cruel to the baby, of course, but to teach them, to give them this gift of being able to walk. So this is how it is with Jesus being elusive with us, to gently attract us, and to take a step back to invite us to come closer to him. So just in this very beginning of John chapter 6, like I said, Jesus is working to prepare his listeners, those in the gospel and us, for the next lesson. And even here, in symbol, he prefigures, he says something about the sacrament of the Eucharist that we celebrate at Mass. He gives us help for today, even while we're learning to receive and to give greater thanks for this incredible gift of what so far we have talked about, this incredible gift of supernatural nourishment. And he leaves us wondering and looking, hopefully, into the next 5 weeks. Like, where will this chapter go? If Jesus' aim is not to be crowned king, then what is his intention? If the miracle of feeding thousands was just like an image, just a preparation for something more, then what could that more be? If there will be a greater food than what he has given these, then what will this food be? And where do we go to get it? I don't want to spoil it, and I don't want to rush ahead. He leaves us kind of on a cliffhanger as he withdraws again to the mountain alone. And like I said, we're going to spend 5 weeks on this. And it gets better.